Hey to all the spooks out there. Welcome to Spine Chilling Chats, dear listeners, both our brave returning souls and the fresh unsuspecting ones who just wandered in. If you're new here, every Wednesday we dig up the darkest corners of true crime, history, folklore, and the supernatural to bring you the most spine-chilling chat possible. I'm Ange.
And I'm Amanda.
Tonight we're diving into a story that's not just unsettling, it's one that rewrites what many of us thought we knew. You've probably heard of Asperger Syndrome, but what if we told you that the man behind the name, Hans Asperger, wasn't the compassionate advocate for children he was once believed to be? Instead, his legacy is tangled in the horrors of Nazi-era eugenics, complicity in unspeakable crimes, and a past that history tried to keep in the shadows. This is the dark history of Hans Asperger. Robbie actually suggested this one to me. And just a trigger warning, there will be mention of child abuse and child murder. So let's get into it.
Why did Robbie suggest this one? What made him think about it?
He saw somebody post on Reddit. It was about, I think it was like things that either like dark history things or things you didn't know, stuff like that. And someone said that Hans Asperger was actually a really horrible person.
Huh. So, I would have never thought that, because you would think that if it's named after, usually when something's named after somebody that's like that, it's a good person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like okay, all right.
Yeah.
This is a surprise to me, guys.
Yeah. So Asperger syndrome is a neurobiological disorder characterized by autism-like abnormalities in social interactions, but with an intelligence and language acquisition. So they may, act a little socially awkward.
Yes.
But they're still very intelligent people. They're able to communicate a lot.
So quick story. He's not being diagnosed, but just coming from what I know of Asperger's and what I've dealt with my nephew didn't talk until he was probably almost 4 years old. However, very intelligent. When he was 1.5, 2 years old, he knew all his colors, all his numbers, he knew shapes, he knew where they went. He couldn't say them, but if my sister said, "What does RED spell?" he would point to it. You would say, "Where's blue?" He would point to it. You'd say, "Where's number 10?" He would make the number 10. He would write his name, all kinds of stuff. Very, very intelligent, but would not speak. But now that he's older, like, I don't think he does have Asperger's. Back then I thought he did, because I'm like, he's very intelligent, but he just won't talk. He wasn't kind of socially awkward, but like, he's not now. Like, he's just, I hate to say it because everybody's normal in their own way, but like, he's normal. And I hate saying that because people are different. Everybody's different. Yeah. Everybody's normal in their own way. I'm not saying anything bad about having Asperger's, but like, I really thought he did. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. But he's just like, and even now, I could tell him my phone number one time, and he'll remember it. He knows my sister's phone number, address, his dad's number, where he was born, where his dad was born, where his stepdad was born, where my sister was born, where his sister was born. He knows all of that. And he's 8 years old.
Yeah.
And he's known all of that for years. Like, since he was about 5 or 6 years old, he's known. Yeah, I was born in Clarksville, Tennessee. Like, I was born in Tennessee. My mom was born in Niles. My dad was born, I don't know where his dad was born, but like, he knows. And you would tell him something one time that has to do with numbers or just anything. Like, he just remembers. He's like this sponge. That's another thing that made me think that he had Asperger's, because like, he would just absorb this information after one time and it would just stick. And I'm just like, man, there's something amazing about this kid.
Robbie's uncle is autistic, and I don't know what flavoring of autism he has.
I like how you use that.
But he actually is very good with numbers as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, "Hey, Uncle Jerry, what's 493 times 226?" And he'll tell you like that. Like, he just does it in his head like that.
Mason is good with numbers. When it comes to math, you could be like, Mason, he's 8. So you're like, Mason, what's 82 minus 16? And he'd be like, boom. Ezra's the same way. Ezra's not autistic, but Ezra's really good with math and numbers. When he was in 3rd, 4th third grade starting. When he was in second grade, he was doing multiplication, like 3-digit multiplication. And usually you're only doing 1 to 2 digit. He was doing 3-digit. And he would never show his work, so he'd always get an F. And I'm like, why are you getting F? You got all the He's like, I don't know, because I'm getting them right. And I was like, but the teacher wants you to show your work. And he's like, but I know how to do it in my head, so why do I need to show my work? That's dumb. Like, he's really smart when it comes to numbers. And I'm just like, I understand that it's stupid,
but you have to go through the process
to show them how you got it. He's like, I got it in my head.
Uncle Jerry, we took him to, I think it was Barnes and Noble when he was visiting, because he lives in Virginia. Robbie's family's mostly from Virginia. And his little thing is he likes to call out Coke, Sprite, ginger ale. So you'll be a couple aisles over and you'll just hear Coke, Sprite, ginger ale. and
That's
then
cute.
Sometimes if he farts or something, he'll go, smells good. It's like, Uncle Jerry, stop. That's funny.
Yeah, that's funny. I like it. I worked with autistic kids too, and like they're some of my favorite people.
Yeah.
Even though they have meltdowns, some of them are mean, they're still my favorite people. They really, really are.
Which just makes this all the more horrific.
Yes. Oh, I don't want to know. Yeah. Because now it makes me sad knowing that it was named after some horrific person.
Yeah. So the disorder was named for Austrian physician Hans Asperger, who first described the symptoms in 1944 as belonging to a condition he called autistic psychopathy. Asperger syndrome used to have its own designation, but as of 2013, it is now included under the umbrella term Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. ASD includes 3 types: autistic disorder, pervasive development disorder, and Asperger syndrome. All 3 conditions have their own social challenges, unusual behaviors, or interests that range from mild to severe, since no 2 people on the autism spectrum are the same. That's why it's a spectrum now. Asperger syndrome is different in the fact that it's milder than the other disorders. Most who are diagnosed typically don't have delays in language or cognitive ability. Many, in fact, may even have above average intelligence. Mm-hmm. A child with Asperger's may seem like a neurotypical child who just behaves a little differently. Johann Friedrich Karl Asperger, aka Hans.
How'd they get Hans? Oh, Han. Okay.
Johann. All right. Hans. Was born February 18th, 1906 in Vienna, Austria. So this still fits in with our February birthday theme.
Yes.
He was raised on a farm in Hasbrunn, which is not far from the city Vienna. He was the eldest of 3 boys, but his younger brother died shortly after birth. As a teen, he was part of the Wandering Scholars of the Bund Neuland, which is an organized outdoor activity group. They did like hiking and mountaineering, which sounds really weird. Like kids going mountaineering, that sounds intense.
Yeah. Like, okay, I get that you're a Boy Scout type person,
Yeah.
but mountaineering, that sounds very professional.
Yes. The Austria-based Bund, which Bund is an association or a group. I had to look that up because I was like, what's a Bund?
What's a Bund? Yeah.
It was founded in 1921 and was split off from the Christian German Student Union, but stressed its affinities with the German youth movement. Hans cited in 1974 that this was a guiding principle in his life, and later stated that he was molded by the spirit of the German youth movement, which was one of the noblest blossoms of the German spirit. This movement kept close ties with the Hitler Youth from the 1930s onward. So you can kind of see where this is going to go. Hans discovered he wanted to be a doctor after dissecting a mouse liver during his final year of high school. He passed his secondary school final exam on May 20th, 1925, with distinction and the grade of very good in all of his subjects.
In high school, their grades were very good?
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
In all of his subjects. Yeah. His daughter stated that from 1916 to 1928, He followed an education geared toward humanism, learning about Western philosophy, Latin, and ancient Greek. He studied medicine at the University of Vienna under Franz Hamburger and went out to practice at the University Children's Hospital in Vienna. He earned his medical degree in 1931 and became the director of the special education section at the university's children's clinic in 1932. Joining the Fatherland Front on May 10, 1934, just 9 days after Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss made himself a dictator. In 1935, at the age of 29, Hans married Hannah Kalman, like salmon?
Salmon?
Yeah, maybe.
Kamen?
Kamen? I don't know. They met during a hike on a mountain and immediately fell in love. It didn't say that they fell in love. I just assumed that they did. I'm adding a little romance to this. They got busy and had 5 children together, 4 daughters and 1 son. Gertrude in 1936, Hans in 1938, Hedwig in 1940.
I kind of like that.
Hedwig, that's the bird.
I know.
That's an owl.
That's Harry Potter's bird.
Maria in 1946 and Bridget in 1948. His daughter Gertrude finished her doctorate in Innsbruck in 1961, and Maria went on to become a renowned child psychiatrist. According to Maria, the 2 events that affected her father the most between 1931 and 1945 were the development of curative education and the confrontation of ideology of National Socialism. Hans was a devout Christian and a practicing Catholic. He had a cold and distant demeanor, some said, with an extensive collection of books. Sources state he had over 10,000 books in his personal library over his lifetime.
I would be in heaven.
That is so many books. Like, where do you even store them all?
I don't know, but that would be freaking awesome.
Like, you would have to be making furniture out of them to sit. Like, where would you keep these books?
In my castle, I would have plenty
you
of
would
space.
have to have a castle. He claimed his progressive spiritual maturity was due to his reading. Former colleagues stated that he often quoted classical authors, poets, and the Bible. Beginning in the spring of 1938, an extensive network of facilities was established for the documentation, observation, evaluation, and selection of children and adolescents whose social behavior, disabilities, and/or parentage did not comply with the Nazi ideology. The recording of these individuals often began in infancy. Doctors and midwives across the empire reported mental and physical abnormalities in newborns and children to health authorities. Medicine and psychiatry came to play in a decisive role in the Third Reich. Medicine was Nazified, but in many ways, Nazism.
That's what I would say, Nazism, but maybe if that's how it's spelled, that's Nazism.
Was also medicalized. After the Anschluss in 1938, which is the annexation of the federal state of Austria into the German Reich, on March 12, 1938, the Nazi and anatomist Eduard Pernkopf was appointed new dean of the medical faculty of the University of Vienna. He fired nearly 80% of the faculty staff, most of whom were Jews. More than 2/3 of Vienna's 4,900 doctors and 70% of the city pediatricians lost their jobs. The Nazification caused a total transformation of Austrian psychiatry. More than 80% of the members of the Vienna's psychoanalytical society were Jewish, and the majority succeeded in fleeing from the country. Schaefer, in her book, points to a clear gender ideology in Asperger's thinking. On the one hand, Asperger and his colleagues separated out the children they believed to be curable with the aid of different principles. They thought that would be curable with some sort of aid, thus socialized back into the community. These children were valuable. By removing them from their families and strengthening their ties to the community, these children could be saved. The children whom they regarded as lost, on the other hand, i.e., who were so badly damaged in their social contact with their environment that their prognosis for being able to fulfill a function in Nazi society was poor, they were without value and thus undesirable. Initially, they were institutionalized, but starting from 1939, they were put to death by the child euthanasia program T4. 30% of those who were killed suffered from physical disabilities. 1 in 10 had Down syndrome. Others suffered from hydrocephalus, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, and other brain injuries or disorders.
So that means that they deserve to die?
According to the Nazis, because they wanted a clean
They wanted the, what did they call it? Master
race. Yeah.
Master.
They wanted
human, I don't know.
A pure
blood.
Yeah. Like
whatever.
Yeah. Socially related coexisting indications in the parents, such as alcoholism, speech defects, or sexual impulsiveness, were often added to the applications for permission to kill the children. In 1941 in Vienna, 72% of newborns were documented within their first year of life by the city's more than 100 maternity clinics.
They're newborns. How do they have speech impediments or sexual impulsiveness?
It's just saying they were documented. So beginning at birth, they're now keeping track of the birth of children, and just so they can keep an eye on
so
them.
They're like,
they're making a register for all their,
there we go,
their citizens.
Okay.
Anyone who came into contact with the health institution was systematically recorded into a hereditary database, which included the patient's genetic information. Over 700,000 Viennese citizens were entered into this database. Genetic information was compounded with school assessments and with employer information and criminal records. Many within Vienna's healthcare system followed Nazi eugenics, and patients of all ages were funneled into specialized facilities in which many patients were mistreated and killed. Throughout Germany and Austria, euthanasia centers were established, including Hadamar Euthanasia Center and Hartham Euthanasia Center for people with mental or physical disabilities. Oh, what?
I hate that. Not you. I hate that they're using the euthanasia.
Yeah,
they're not fucking animals.
Yeah.
Not the animals deserve to die either, but like that just is so inconsiderate.
Yeah. Later on, I mentioned that let's just call it what it is: murder.
Yeah.
Like it's murder. You're not euthanizing. You're murdering. So children were not spared. Many children were mercifully, in quotes, sent to children's hospitals, and among the most prominent of these was the Kinderspital Children's Clinic am Spiegelgrund in Vienna. Among the patients were those deemed unworthy of life. As part of the Steinhoff Psychiatric Complex, the Spiegelgrund Clinic housed state-sponsored pediatric euthanasia. A heartbreaking 789 children were euthanized or murdered in the Spiegelgrund Clinic, while the Steinhoff complex was responsible for the death of around 7,500 patients by the end of World War II. The clinic operated under the direction of the Führer's Chancellery and Ministry of the Interior, where physicians conducted all manner of procedures on the vulnerable and disabled children, which were often fatal. The Am Steinhoff Psychiatric Hospital was established in the early 1900s, but from July 1940 to April 1945, it housed the Spiegelgrund Clinic. The doctors at the clinic conducted painful experiments on thousands of living children before they were murdered. Pneumatic encephalography a dangerous and painful procedure was routinely performed on children at Spiegelgrund. The ventricles of their brain were filled with air so as to be visible on X-ray. So they're pumping air into their brain. And then the X-rays prepared the ground for further research after the children either died during the procedure or they were murdered afterward.
That's just crazy.
Am Springelgrund was divided into a reform school and a children's ward, where sick and disabled adolescents were innocent subjects to medical experiments and victims of nutritional and psychological abuse. Many died by lethal injection and gas poisoning, others by disease, starvation, exposure to the elements, and accidents relating to their conditions. The brains of up to 800 victims were preserved in jars and housed in the hospital for decades. And that's the picture that I made the thumbnail for this episode.
Okay.
Those are all the brains in the jars of these children that they kept.
Okay, that's what that is.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure it out at first. Now I can see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The clinic has become infamous due in part to the treatment of children by lead psychiatrist Henrik Gross. Gross was responsible for the deaths of at least 9 defective children, but may have played a major role in killing of hundreds more and preserved many dead children as medical specimens. Gross went unpunished for his actions after the end of World War II and became a court psychiatrist in Austria, much of what he did only becoming public knowledge very late in his life. The clinic is also known because of the children referred to it by none other than Austrian psychiatrist Hans Asperger, whose role in the patient selection process in the children's ward came to light in the 2010s, making him a highly controversial figure in more recent years. Schaefer points to the radical change in Hans' writing about the children before and after the Nazis came to power. In 1937, he wrote that it is impossible to establish a rigid set of criteria for diagnosis. But in the following year, he claimed to be able to identify a well-characterized group of children who we name autistic psychopaths. In 1941, the autistic psychopaths were said to live in their own lives without an emotional relationship with the environment. In 1944, the child is defined in terms of the community. The autist is only himself, autos, and is not an active member of the greater organism which he is influenced by and which he influences constantly. So they're all about, the greater good of the group versus the life of one.
Mm-hmm.
In 1940, Hans attained a position as a medical expert in Vienna. He was in charge of diagnosing hereditary diseases and proposing forced sterilization in the interest of the Nazi eugenics program. Even at that time, the excess mortality in Vienna's psychiatric hospitals was no secret to the general population, who protested against the situation, especially in September and November of 1940. According to Czech's analyst, Czech is a historian he's wrote about Hans a lot, and he researched all of Hans' writing. So according to his analysis of Hans' written diagnosis, he was not more benevolent towards his patients than his peers in labeling children with diagnosis that could have an enormous impact on their future. Quite the contrary. In the majority of cases, Hans made a harsher judgment than other doctors towards the children and adolescents he examined, making a point not to sugarcoat anything. Schaefer chooses to interpret Asperger's formulations as expressions of a real change in his views of these children. An alternative interpretation is that he adapted his text to Nazi ideology and language to protect his own career, which very well could have been. I'm sure it was a very scary time for everyone, so it's hard to say whether he really did believe in the same ideology as the Nazis, or if he was just trying to save his own butt and not be murdered.
Yeah. No, I know what you're trying to say.
So it's hard to say. Asperger, nevertheless, remains responsible for his writings. Although he never explicitly wrote that the children with the most severe pathologies ought to be put to death, he referred many of them to Am's Spiegelgrund in the full knowledge that children were killed there. Euthanasia of the mentally ill was never referred to explicitly in official documents, perhaps with the exception of those classified as top secret. As Czech writes, mere mention of the possibility of killing patients would constitute a serious violation of state secrecy. Therefore, there is no direct evidence that Asperger referred patients to their deaths. However, Czech notes that a number of examples showing that there was a general awareness of the euthanasia program among the citizens of Vienna. He concludes that it was extremely unlikely that Asperger, with his unique position and various tasks and contacts, was unaware of what was going on at Am's Spiegelgrund.
Whatever.
Yeah, so he's saying that there's no way with his connections and who he was that he didn't know what was going on there.
Right.
So he literally sent these children knowing that they were going to be killed. Asperger was free to refer the children to places other than the clinic that was highly likely to put them to death. Czech concludes that Asperger must have seen euthanasia as an acceptable last resort for children with severe disabilities. In his records, he wrote about one of the children that he sent to their inevitable death on June 27, 1941. Herta Schreiber would be recommended for Am Springelgrund, and that's where she would end up losing her life. The 2-year-old girl has sustained a brain injury after becoming ill with diphtheria and encephalitis a few months earlier. His records state severe personality disorder post-encephalic, very severe motor retardation, urethic idiocy, epileptic seizures. The child is an unbearable burden at home for her mother, who has 5 healthy children to care for. A permanent placement seems absolute necessary. Dr. Asperger, and then it goes on with the file name and stuff like that. 4 days later, Herta was admitted to Am Springelgrund, the children's clinic at the large psychiatric hospital Am Steinhof in Vienna. The hospital consisted of 60 pavilions in the Art Nouveau style, designed by the famous architect Otto Wagner. 1 month later, the senior medical officer at Am Springelgrund, Erwin Jekelius, reported to the National Committee for Scientific Registration of Serious Hereditary and Congenital Diseases in Berlin that Herta suffered from idiocy, seeking no contact with her surroundings. The National Committee was responsible for the secret Nazi child euthanasia program. In reality, euthanasia was the euphemism for the Nazi racial hygiene eugenic murder program. Jekelius ticked the boxes on the form indicating that Herta's condition was incurable and that it would have no effect on her life expectancy. Jekelius was in fact asking for permission to kill Herta. 1 month later, on September 2nd, 1941, the day after Herta's 3rd birthday, Herta was put to death. The doctors registered pneumonia as the cause of death.
So if it wasn't against the law that they're euthanizing these kids, why lie? Why lie about her manner of death?
Well, that's just like concentration camps.
I know,
they weren't,
but it's just
they weren't
so
killing
stupid.
there either.
Yeah, they were taking showers.
Yeah, they were taking showers. So while Hans didn't technically kill her himself, his initial admittance to Am Springelgrund set the ball in motion for her eventual murder. And again, that's where I said, let's just call it what it is, murder, not euthanasia.
Yeah.
In 1942, following a request addressed to his superior Franz Hamburger, Hans took part in the selection of patients aimed at separating the uneducable from those who would become German citizens. Although he was not directly responsible for their death, he chose 35 children whom he considered to be uneducable. While he did not cooperate with the forced sterilization programs according to the records, he also did not oppose them. According to historian Herwig Czech, what emerges from the available sources is that Asperger's approach to the forced sterilization program was ambivalent. He quotes passages written by Hans Asperger demonstrating his support for the aspect of racial hygiene policy, which is, in the new Germany, we took on new responsibilities in addition to our old ones. To the task of helping the individual patient is added to the great obligation to promote the health of the people, which is more than the well-being of the individual. I need not add to the enormous amount of dedicated work done in terms of affirmative action and support. But we all know that we must also take restrictive measures, just as the physician must often make painful incisions during the treatment of individuals. We must also make incisions in the national body out of a sense of responsibility. We must make sure that those patients who would pass on their diseases to distant generations to the detriment of the individual and of the Volk, which is the people, are prevented from passing on their diseased hereditary material. Hans Asperger. So psychiatrists and children's psychiatrists played a key role in the Nazi regime and implemented the ideology of racial purity in the Reich. Motorized maternal health care was one of the instruments that were used to provide healthcare services to the rural population. While this service was in line with the notions of social hygiene to foster a healthy population, it also functioned as the Nazi regime's surveillance instrument. Nazi doctors registered and prepared statistics of illness in the population, such as tuberculosis, but they also indexed undesirable persons, such as people with alcoholism and congenital defects. Springelgrund therefore received not only patients from other clinics, orphanages, and practices, but also unwanted children whom the doctors had indexed in the villages. Among them was Marie Fichtinger, a girl born with hemiparesis. In August 1942, on recommendation from the doctors, her father signed a warrant for her transfer to an institution. After her admission to Springelgrund, Marie was diagnosed with profound idiocy. Chief Medical Officer Henrik Gross sent an application to the National Committee for permission to put her to death. On New Year's Eve the same year, she was killed.
Hemiparesis is a muscle weakness or partial paralysis on the side of the body that can affect arms, legs, and facial muscles.
Well, I figured hemi is half,
which
and
also
is
reminds me of what's the one where you get
a stroke,
but it's not a stroke. It's like you had a stroke, but it's not. It's a.
I don't know.
It'll come to me.
Okay. Hans was a fierce critic of psychoanalysts and the belief that upbringing and traumas were formative for children's development and tended to emphasize biological and constitutional explanations in line with Nazi racial hygiene.
Bell's palsy.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was thinking when it said half, but it also affects the arm and the leg. Bell's palsy is usually just the face, I think.
Abnormalities were explained in terms of general inferiority of the nervous system, an idea that shows through in the text he published after the war. His opposition to psychoanalysts and the role of trauma in development of psychopathology is especially evident in his explanation of sexual abuse of children. He claimed that children who were exposed to abuse needed to have an innate disposition, a shamelessness that made them attract such incidents. So he's saying it's the victim's fault
Of course he is.
for attracting the abuse.
Yeah, because they were asking for it.
Yes. Moreover, children with a healthy personality would outgrow even serious sexual traumas. There was no conflict between the tradition of which Asperger was a part and a biological understanding of illness. On the contrary, these went hand in hand. Check and Schaefer believe that Hans Asperger's diagnosis were sexist, while Dean Falk refutes that Hans Asperger was sexist. Schaefer devotes a chapter in her book to the difference between the diagnosis of boys and girls. According to Claude Grimmel's review in the journal, it should not be considered surprising that Asperger's diagnosis contains all the gender biases of the time. Which, everybody was sexist back then, really.
Yeah. Women stayed in the kitchen, men did the work. That's how it was.
Men were
the
more intelligent
dominant.
anyways.
Yeah. They were more intelligent and they could go to school, and the women just had to be
barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen.
Yep.
Check notes that Hans Asperger's gender bias leads to disadvantaging girls in terms of sexual abuse and precociousness, adding that he blames victims of sexual abuse. Check cites, in particular, the example of the diagnosis of a 12-year-old Jewish girl who, according to Asperger, acted like a mad woman, talked about anti-Jewish persecution, was afraid. Asperger interpreted these signs of distress as symptoms of schizophrenia and concluded in his report, for her age and race, sexual development is visibly retarded. Hans Asperger resumed his academic career after the war in 1945, returning to the department he was directing, which had been destroyed by a bombardment. His authorization to teach was confirmed on February 9th, 1946, because he was not a member of the NSDAP, so the Nazis. Between 1946 and 1949, he was deputy director of the pediatric clinic in Vienna. In 1948, he co-founded a pediatric clinic in Innsbruck, Austria, for 5 years, succeeding Richard Priesel, who died suddenly on November 18, 1955. Documentation of this part of his life is scarce. Hans Asperger's name is the last one mentioned on the list of recommendations after those of 3 other doctors. Asperger took up his new position on March 31st, 1957, with an inaugural lecture devoted to problems in modern pediatrics. According to the Innsbruck historian Franz Hutter, Hans Asperger quickly created a circle of friends and colleagues. His wife, Hannah, preferred to stay in Vienna. He was generally appreciated there. Asperger was then appointed to the chair of pediatrics at the Vienna Hospital on June 26, 1962, and was its director until his official retirement in 1977. In 1964, he was in charge of SOS Kinderdorf in Hinterbruch. And that same year, he was appointed president of something.
Some international thing.
Yeah. On May 8th, 1971, he was appointed vice president of the newly founded Austrian Society for Allergy and Immunology. He became professor emeritus in 1977 and died 3 years later on October 20th, 1980, after a short illness. In 2010, there was a majority consensus to subsume Asperger syndrome into the diagnosis autism spectrum disorder in the 2013 DSM-5 diagnostic manual. The World Health Organization's ICD-10 version 2015 describes Asperger syndrome as a disorder of uncertain nosological validity. Czech was the first to study the issue of Hans Asperger's Jewish patients. While Asperger did not express overtly anti-Semitic ideas, his public statements and Asperger's treatment of his Jewish patients show an indifference to the persecution suffered by the population. He also seems to have internalized at least some of the anti-Jewish stereotypes of his time. According to Czech, it is from April 2018 onwards that Hans Asperger's legacy is seriously questioned, notably through an editorial and press release distributed by widely reported in the media, and then by the publication of Edith Schaefer's book a few weeks later. This gave rise to some sensationalist media exaggerations concerning the true role of Asperger's. Silberman reconsidered his position, pointing out that autistic people who once saw Hans Asperger as an ally probably felt betrayed, and updated new editions of his book. And so, while Hans may not have been directly responsible for murdering hundreds of autistic children, he definitely had a hand in their death.
So I don't know if you know this, like I don't know if you read about this, but why did they want to name it that? Do you know what I mean? Like, why did they want to name it after
because
him?
it didn't come until 2018 that it really came to light that he was
Bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
When
So
somebody
when did they name it after him? 2010.
Yeah, 2010.
But nobody knew before then what was happening.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No. They named it after him because they thought he was doing good work.
Yeah.
As we all
he was
did.
diagnosing them and thinking that he was helping them.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then just a few years ago came into light that
he's a piece of shit.
Yeah, that after they read his notes and investigating a little bit, that hey, he was a pretty horrific person.
Mm-hmm.
As was Dr. Gross, who didn't get charged with all these murders.
Well, I say good riddance to them.
But that was the dark history of Asperger syndrome, with a focus on Hans Asperger himself.
Yeah.
If you liked this episode and want to hear others like it, you can go to our website, www.spinechillingchatspodcast.com. We have links to other episodes. If you're listening to this, you can also watch it on YouTube. Mm-hmm. We have video, so check that out. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Anywhere you're listening to podcasts, you can find us.
Mm-hmm.
You can submit stories to us on our website or via email, which is spinechillingchatspodcast@gmail.com. There is no hyphen. And we're looking for ghost stories if you have any of those. Any fairy fucking stories. We know you got down and dirty last week or the week before for Valentine's Day. I don't remember how many weeks ago it was.
Yeah, the days are all blurring together. But yeah, so we know you're doing the dirty. Yeah. Might as well just tell us a story that you want us to tell.
Any glitches in the Matrix you've experienced? Any cryptid sightings? Have you seen Bigfoot? Is he your friend? Just let us know.
Anything.
Yeah, we'd like to read them.
Anything. I mean, we're covering everything, but true crime, anything. Let us know. We'll look it up. We'll do some research and we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's all
That's all we got. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you come back. And most of all, we hope you keep it spooky. Bye, guys.
Bye.